Welcome to the Fun's Clip channel, where every film is retold concisely, clearly, and full of fascinating details. From adrenaline-fueled action, suspenseful mysteries to touching dramas, you'll find it all here. In this story, Frank Martin is once again caught up in a dangerous mission. What started as a former Special Forces officer, now working as a private driver, turns into a life-and-death struggle when a child is kidnapped. This is a journey full of chases, conspiracies, and non-stop action from Transporter 2. At the beginning of the film, we are shown a shiny black sedan in a parking building, where from behind the wheel sits a man with a Sigma male aura, neat clothes, and a luxurious helmet that matches the luxury of his car. This man is named Frank Martin. When he was about to start the engine, suddenly a curly-haired girl knocked on the window, while asking for Frank's help to replace her flat tire. With the excuse of being afraid of being late, Frank refused to help her. It turns out that this curly-haired girl had other intentions. Coupled with the guidance of his pistol, Frank was forced to get out, followed by a group of thugs who carelessly entered Frank's car to rob him.
This shit ain't working, man. It's code.
It turned out they were the curly-haired man's gang, and one thing they didn't realize was that they had tried to rob the wrong person, so they had no choice but to know the consequences themselves. After moving from France and deciding to settle in Miami, Florida, Frank now carries out his profession as a private driver in an official's family, namely, taking a boy named Jack to and from school. While he worked there, Frank, with his stiff and cold nature, turned out to have succeeded in making Jack comfortable and at home with him, especially when Jack often asked him to play guessing games. When he arrived at his residence, Jack was greeted by his mother named Audrey. She was very happy with Frank's presence in their midst because his attitude seemed to be a substitute for Jefferson, or Jack's father, whose relationship with Audrey was not going well. Frank, who was cold and aloof, made Audrey a little tempted. Then Audrey asked Frank to take Jack to his personal doctor for a routine health checkup, but apparently someone had recorded their conversation and then reported it. On the other hand, the villains under Giant's car have formed and prepared the most dangerous virus package for a specific purpose.
See you tomorrow, gentlemen.
When night falls, Frank is surprised by the arrival of Audrey, who has often quarreled with Jefferson, now feels that she has lost her leadership role in her life, so she tries to make a Frank so that she can have a role, even if only for that night. Luckily, she is more self-aware and still respects Audrey as a superior. She shouldn't have behaved like that to him. The next morning, Jack arrived at the hospital for his prank, unaware that all the medical staff in the room had been sabotaged by Gianni's men, who had deliberately arrived early to make Jack the target of their crime. Jack thought that they all looked unfamiliar to him, so he chose not to be examined except by his personal doctor. However, in the end, they managed to persuade Jack and take him into the doctor's examination room.
Please, it's a phone.
On the other hand, when Frank received a call from his friend, he noticed many strange things, especially from the blonde-haired man, whose attitude and appearance did not reflect that he was a medical staff member. As a result, Frank realized that they were all fake doctors, and his suspicion was proven when he found them trying to inject Jack with the virus. Not wanting that to happen, Frank immediately secured Jack first and then turned to confront them with whatever defense he had. With the bulletproof car, which had actually been rigged with a bomb, Frank tried to get out of the location and take Jack home as quickly as possible. However, as soon as he arrived at his house, Frank suddenly received a threat from Gianni that his car would be destroyed if he did not let the blonde man and take Jack away to someplace. For the sake of Jack and his family's safety, Frank was forced to follow Gianni's wishes. Meanwhile, Audrey could only watch from behind the window of her room, not understanding what was actually happening.
Now drive.
On the other hand, with the blonde in his car, Frank automatically became the target of the police who were still hunting him down. Fortunately, his driving skills were unquestionable, and even the blonde was amazed by his skills. Meanwhile, at Jefferson's residence, there were already many police investigatos, but they still hadn't found Frank. They assumed that Frank was most likely working with Gianni, considering his background as a former Special Forces soldier. In short, Frank had arrived at a location designated by Gianni, and Jack immediately used Sandra to owe-batten a ransom of $100 million that Jefferson had to pay within just 2 hours. After realizing that the amount was non-negotiable, Jefferson was forced to agree to Gianni's demands for the sake of his son's life. Meanwhile, Frank was forced to leave Jack alone until he realized there was a bomb under his car. Even though Frank had left, Gianni was still going to detonate it. The scene shifts to Frank's residence, where Inspector Tarconi, Frank's friend mentioned earlier, also became a target when the officers came to search the house. Even though they eventually found out that Tarconi was a police inspector, seeing the situation getting more chaotic, Frank immediately called Audrey and convinced her that he was not involved in all this. He even promised to save Jack as soon as possible.
Call you back.
A moment later, Frank was already at the hospital and managed to find clues about the perpetrator and also obaten the virus fluid that had been used to inject Jack. With the help of information from Inspector Tarconi, Frank immediately went to the address of one of the perpetrators, who turned out to be a Russian biologist named Dmitri. A high-speed chase ensued. In short, the chase ended on a public bus when Dmitri was cornered and Frank injected him with a liquid that Dmitri believed to be his own virus, but which was actually just plain water deliberately used to psychologically damage Dmitri and make him even more panicked. At the same time, Jefferson was seen delivering the ransom money to a certain location, but after hours of waiting, no one came to collect the suitcase of money. Shortly after, the police found a box truck that Jack was suspected to be inside. A mother's instinct drove Audrey to run and force open the truck's door, disregarding the dangers around her that might be targeting her. Eventually, she successfully found Jack still alive. Back to the pursuit of Dmitri, where, out of fear, he immediately headed to a laboratory to get the antidote Vacone, while Frank continued to stalk him from behind. Suddenly, a tall man appeared and attacked, causing Frank to be slightly overwhelmed. Upon arriving at the lab, Dmitri immediately threatened his 2 colleagues to show him the vaccine. However, there were only 2 bottles of vaccine in stock, so in order to get the vaccine, Dmitri was willing to kill one of his own friends. Soon after, Frank arrived and explained that Dmitri was just a fool who had been tricked by a fake injection. Unable to accept being mocked by Frank, Dmitri immediately vented his anger. But what happened? Now there is only one doctor left, and Frank also managed to scare him so much that he was willing to explain that the virus was designed to destroy the body's immune system. In this case, Jack was the person who had been injected with the virus, which meant that Jack's life and the lives of those breathing near him would disappear in less than 24 hours. However, when Frank needed to obtain the vaccine, the man deliberately threw both bottles out the window. Frank was forced to fight for his life, but in the end, he could only save 1 bottle. Elsewhere, Jack was still lying weak while the doctor diagnosed his illness as being caused by common virus. However, after the Frank came to visit Audrey, she realized that she and her husband had also tested positive for the deadly virus. At that moment, Audrey immediately explained the situation to Jeff, who was about to attend a conference of politicians. Unfortunately, the poor signal inside the building disrupted their conversation, forcing Jeff to hang up the phone.
Mr. Billings, you all right?
Meanwhile, Frank relied on Inspector Tacconi to track down Gianni, who he believed had more vaccines. To avoid the police, Frank was forced to hijack a taxi and speed away that night. However, at the same time, the virus had completely attacked Audrey's immune system and caused her to fall unconscious. Jeff also experienced similar symptoms and had to be rushed to the hospital. The story then shifts to Gianni's residence, specifically when he chooses to inject all of his vaccine stock into his body with the help of the doctor, who turns out to be still alive. However, with Frank's sudden arrival, Gianni had to go through a bit of a cold sweat. With his skills, Frank followed him to a basement room where Gianni's men also flocked to get their additional weapons. Relying only on his bare hands, Frank seemed ready to take them on, and the fight began. Not satisfied with defeating dozens of people in that room, Frank then headed to the next room and the next fight began.
Don't move.
Finally, Frank faced Gianni directly, although he couldn't do much to him because killing Gianni would be same as destroying all his vaccines. Here, Frank learned that Gianni was only a highly paid second-in-command working for a Colombian businessman whose goal was to kill all politicians like Jefferson so that they could freely market their products in this country. However, in the middle of the conversation, the blonde appeared, giving Gianni the opportunity to escape, but it didn't take long for Frank to incapacitate him as well. After that, Frank immediately stepped on the gas to catch up with the helicopter carrying Gianni. The speed of his supercar attracted the attention of many people before he managed to reach the main airport, just before Gianni took off in the next plane. With sheer courage, Frank managed to take control of the plane and challenge Gianni to a fight inside it. However, one shot missed the pilot, causing the plane to become unstable and lose control. In short, Gianni was captured alive, and thanks to the vaccine in his blood, everyone who had been exposed earlier was saved. Most importantly, Audrey and Jeff's family could reunite peacefully. That's the plot of the movie Transporter 2. Don't forget to watch the original version, and see you next time.